The cowboy who came back from his own funeral. The wind came hard across the plains of Red Hollow, carrying dust, dry grass, and the smell of old secrets. It rattled shutters, moaned through fence posts, and whispered across the cemetery on the hill where crooked wooden markers leaned like tired men. On one grave, fresh dirt still sat dark against the pale earth. The marker read, Jacob Reed, beloved husband, loyal friend, shot down by outlaws, gone too soon. The whole town had attended his funeral 3 days earlier. They had cried, they had prayed, they had lowered an empty coffin into the ground. And now, on the third night after his burial, Jacob Reed rode back into town. Chapter 1. A Dead Man Rides. It was near midnight when old Marshall Boone heard hoofbeats outside his office. No one rode into Red Hollow at that hour unless they were drunk, desperate, or dangerous. Boone reached for his rifle and stepped onto the porch. Moonlight silvered the empty street. A lone rider approached slowly, coat torn, hat low, shoulders bent from exhaustion. The horse stopped. The rider lifted his face. Marshall Boone staggered backward. Dear Lord, Jacob Reed smiled weakly. Evenin', Marshall. Boone's rifle slipped from his hands and clattered to the porch. You're dead. Not yet, Jacob said. The town bell rang 30 minutes later. Lights flared in windows. Doors opened. Men grabbed lanterns and guns. Women crossed themselves. Children peered from behind curtains. By the time Jacob reached the center of town, half of Red Hollow stood frozen in the street. Some screamed, some ran, some whispered that hell had opened. And one man, Mayor Clarence Pike, turned pale as snow. Because unlike the others, he knew exactly why Jacob Reed had returned. Chapter 2. The Funeral. 3 days earlier, Red Hollow had buried Jacob Reed with tears and hymns. They said bandits attacked him on the canyon road. They said his wagon burned. They said no body remained fit to see. His wife, Sarah Reed, had stood in black clothes beside the coffin, her face dry and hard as stone. She hadn't cried once. When the preacher finished, she placed Jacob's old sheriff badge atop the casket. Then she whispered, "If you're alive, come home." No one heard her but the wind. Now she stood in the street staring at the man who had been buried. Jacob slid from the saddle. For a moment they only looked at each other. Then Sarah crossed the dirt road in 3 steps and struck him across the face so hard his hat flew off. "You fool," she said, voice shaking. "You absolute fool." Then she threw herself into his arms. The town watched in silence as the widow kissed the dead man. Chapter 3. What happened in Devil's Pass. Inside the saloon, Jacob sat at a table while everyone crowded around. His face was bruised, his left arm wrapped in blood-stained cloth, his beard grown wild, eyes hollow with fatigue. He drank water like a man rescued from the desert. Then he spoke. "I was carrying payroll money to Silver Creek Mine," he said. "Halfway through Devil's Pass, 4 masked riders ambushed me. Gasps filled the room. They shot my horse, took the wagon, left me for dead." "Who were they?" Boone asked. Jacob looked slowly around the room. "Men who knew my route." Silence. Only 5 people had known the route. Marshall Boone, Sarah, the banker, Mayor Pike, and Jacob himself. "I crawled into a ravine," Jacob continued. "They thought I was dead. Burned the wagon and rode off." "So why didn't you come back sooner?" someone asked. Jacob's jaw tightened. "Because they came back looking for the body." The room went still. "I hid in a cave 2 days with a bullet wound and no water. When they finally left, I walked 20 miles to an old trapper's cabin." He looked at Mayor Pike. "And then I came home." The mayor forced a smile. "Remarkable story." Jacob met his eyes. "It gets better." Chapter 4. The Mayor's Fear. Clarence Pike had built Red Hollow with speeches, polished boots, and money no one could explain. He owned half the town. Bank loans, cattle rights, freight routes, saloons. He shook hands with one palm and stole with the other. No one could prove it. But Jacob Reed had tried. As town sheriff years earlier, Jacob had investigated missing shipments, false taxes, and ranchers run off their land. Every trail led toward Pike. Every witness vanished or changed their story. Then Jacob retired after threats against Sarah. Now he was supposed to be dead. Instead he sat alive in Pike's saloon drinking whiskey and smiling like a wolf. That night Pike packed gold bars into saddlebags. He planned to leave before dawn. But when he opened his office door, Jacob sat in the chair behind the desk, hat tilted low, revolver resting across his lap. "You're up late, Clarence." Pike froze. "How did you get in here?" "You forgot your window latch." Pike swallowed. "What do you want?" "The truth." Chapter 5. A Long Memory. Jacob stood. "You remember Eli Turner?" Pike blinked. "The rancher. The one found hanging after refusing to sell land." Pike said nothing. "And Samuel Voss, the banker. The banker who burned alive after threatening to expose stolen funds." Pike's hands trembled. "Then there's Deputy Nolan, shot in the back." Jacob stepped closer. "I spent 5 years trying to prove what everyone knew." "You have no evidence," Pike whispered. Jacob smiled. "I do now." He pulled a ledger from inside his coat. Pages of names, payments, bribes, hired guns, stolen shipments. Pike lunged for it. Jacob struck him with the revolver butt. The mayor crashed to the floor. "You killed me at Devil's Pass for this book," Jacob said. "Problem is," he crouched beside him, "you forgot to check if I stayed dead." Chapter 6. Fire in the Streets. Pike escaped through the rear door and ran shouting for help. Within minutes gunmen poured into the streets, men on Pike's payroll. Shots cracked through town. Windows shattered. People dove for cover. Jacob and Boone took positions behind a trough. Sarah loaded rifles beside them. "You should be inside," Jacob said. She handed him ammunition. "You were buried 3 days ago." "I'm past taking orders." Gunfire raged across Red Hollow. One outlaw charged horseback down Main Street. Sarah shot him clean from the saddle. Boone laughed. "Marry her again." Jacob grinned despite the chaos. The townsfolk, long bullied and silent, began joining the fight. Shopkeepers with shotguns, ranchers with rifles, blacksmiths with hammers. Years of fear turned to fury. Pike's hired men realized too late they no longer faced one cowboy. They faced a town waking up. Chapter 7. The Bell Tower Duel. As dawn bled red across the horizon, Pike climbed the church bell tower with a rifle. From above, he fired into the streets. 2 men fell wounded. "No one move," he shouted, "or I kill the next." Jacob looked up. Then he walked into the open street alone. Sarah shouted after him. He didn't stop. Pike aimed down. "You should have stayed dead." Jacob spread his arms. "Then finish it." Pike fired. Jacob dropped a split second before the shot. The bullet smashed the saloon sign. From an alley window, Sarah fired once. Her bullet shattered Pike's rifle. He staggered backward. Jacob sprinted into the church, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The town heard pounding feet above. Then silence. Then one gunshot. A minute later Jacob emerged dragging Pike by the collar. The mayor's nose was broken. His fancy coat torn. Hands tied. The people of Red Hollow stared. For years they had bowed to him. Now he knelt in the dust. Chapter 8. Judgment. The ledger was read aloud in the street. Bribes. Murders. Land theft. Payroll robbery. The Devil's Pass ambush. Every crime signed with initials and payments. Even Pike's gunmen turned on him. "I paid you," Pike screamed. "You paid late," one replied. Marshal Boone arrested Clarence Pike at sunrise. No mob formed. No hanging tree was used. Instead the town chose something Pike had never given others. A trial. Weeks later he was sentenced to prison for life. His fortune was seized and returned to those he had ruined. Some said prison was too kind. Jacob disagreed. "Living powerless," he said, "will hurt him more." Chapter 9. The Grave on the Hill. That evening Jacob rode to the cemetery alone. He stood before his own grave. Fresh dirt, wooden cross, his own name staring back. Sarah approached quietly behind him. "Strange thing," he said. "Reading your own tombstone." She stood beside him. "You planning to keep it?" He smiled. "Might be useful." "Good reminder." "Of what?" "That a man can lose everything in one day." She touched his hand. "And gain it back in the next." Jacob pulled the marker from the ground. Laid it aside. Then together they shoveled the grave closed. Chapter 10. A New Life. Red Hollow changed after that. Fear loosened its grip. Families returned. Businesses reopened. Ranches once stolen were restored. Children played in streets that had belonged to gunmen. Marshal Boone finally retired. The town voted Jacob sheriff again. He refused. "I've done enough chasing ghosts." Instead he bought a small ranch outside town with Sarah. Built new fences. Raised horses. Watched sunsets without carrying a gun. Though he kept one nearby. Because the West had a long memory. And so did he. Travelers passing Red Hollow often asked about the weathered grave marker hanging above the Reed barn door. Jacob Reed. Gone too soon. If Jacob heard them reading it, he'd grin and say, "Rumors of my death were mostly accurate." Then Sarah would throw a boot at him. Epilogue. The legend. Years later, children told stories around campfires. Of the cowboy who attended his own funeral. Of the widow who shot straighter than any man. Of the mayor dragged from a bell tower. Of the dead rider who came home at midnight. Some swore Jacob Reed could not be killed. Others said he had already died once and refused a second time. Jacob himself gave only one answer whenever asked. He'd tip his hat, stare toward the cemetery hill, and say, "Never trust a coffin that weighs too little." Then he'd ride off laughing into the dust, while the sun set red over Red Hollow and the wind carried the tale farther west.